Hello, everybody. Today we have Vedran Cindrić of Treble, CEO of Treble. Hey, Vedran, thanks for joining.
Hey, Eric, thank you so much for having me on. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for taking the time. You recently published a report that is called Anatomy of an API report, where I think there are a lot of interesting statistics in there that just tell us a little bit where the API space is going and how trends are changing. And I always think that looking at these reports is very useful because typically you don't get the insight that companies like Travel have. So let's just get started by briefly talking about maybe the history of the report and then also how you are actually gathering the data for the report.
Of course. That's a great question. So let's start with a brief history. So, hi everyone. Again, my name is Vedran. I'm the CEO and founder of Treble, and Treble is an API intelligence platform where we essentially help organizations understand their APIs. And the way that we do that is essentially by having a suite of products that starts with observability, governance, security, compliance, analytics, all of these different products, and they all kind of stem from the core product, which is observability. To get that data, you essentially have to install a small SDK or agent either on your gateway or the code itself. So that way, Treble, of course, has runtime access to all of the request and the response data. Of course, we ship this on-prem, private cloud, whatever. There's also a lot of security built into the SDK that kind of prevents sensitive data from ever going off of your server. But essentially, because we have access to that data, we're able to get and analyze a large quantity of relevant API data. So on a monthly basis, we essentially process about 2.8 to 3 billion API requests per month on our public cloud. We track about 15,000 different APIs across 500,000 API endpoints around the world, right? And based on that data, we took a set sample, if you will, from about 1 billion requests. And we analyze that, and that gives us access to, again, everything from request payloads, response payloads, security configurations, request data, response data, headers, everything we need in order to understand all of these reports. And we've been publishing the report for about 2 years now. This is our second year. Officially, we've been tracking it since, I would say, 2022. The first one came out 2023. And then the latest one came out in December of 2024.
And when we talked about this, I found that interesting when you said, okay, we only used 1 billion because then the database started to slow down a little bit, which is very understandable. So that's a lot of data that you have access to. Yeah. And it's, again, right, it's interesting to just look a little bit at how things are looking and how things are changing in the API space. So can you walk us just through kind of a high level overview of the most interesting insights? And of course, I would like to encourage everybody to download the report. I mean, there's much more stuff in there, but maybe you can give us a little bit of a teaser of what to expect and what you found interesting.
Of course. Like you said, you could download the entire report on report.treble.com. That's Treble with 2 L's. But let's try to unpack some of the 5, I'm going to say, key findings or most interesting things that we found this year. Starting off with, I'm going to say, the scale of the enterprise landscape. So we kind of started tracking how many APIs a particular enterprise or large organization has. And most enterprise level organizations maintain over 1,000 APIs within their landscape. And predominantly, I'm going to say, based on the data that we have, the majority of those are designed for internal use. So if you go even a step further, I would say 60% of those are internal APIs, around 30% are essentially partner APIs, and then 10% are public APIs that are actually visible to somebody. So this actually even surprised me because, of course, there are industries like financial, banking, insurance that have traditionally had really large API portfolios, but more and more companies are growing their API portfolios. Again, a lot of this is driven by partnerships, but also their internal kind of desire to be able to innovate faster and release faster by using an API first approach or API as a product approach. Second finding, one of the things that we do on an API level is we have a governance score for every API. The governance score is a unique score that goes from 0 to 100, or A, B, C, D, E, F for our US-based friends. And essentially, it measures three categories: performance, security, and quality. And it does that at runtime, and it executes around 40 different audits on every single API request. So that's a compounded score, and we looked at the data. We can break down different programming languages and everything. And what we found is that JavaScript-based APIs score lower than the average. So the average was around 57 out of 100, and JavaScript-based APIs scored 26% below the average with a score of 42. Now that, again, we can talk about it. You and I have discussed it. I think there's almost a gold rush happening with the whole AI boom, and people are just like building APIs left and right. And naturally, one of the first languages that you can easily pick up and build an API in is JavaScript, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of APIs that are not necessarily built by people who have been building APIs in these larger companies. And you're probably going to see even more of this. Like when we look at more traditional languages, .NET Core or Java, these guys usually have like really good scores, and generally have had those scores pretty high even last year. Now, there is one exception I will note. There is a framework called Adonis.js. It's a JavaScript framework predominantly kind of designed and built for building backend services and API. All users in that framework have had larger scores. Now, if we move from that to something adjacent to the API enterprise landscape team, we've noticed that APIs are becoming increasingly more complex. What does that mean? Well, essentially, when we looked at the data from 2023, the average number of API endpoints on an API was 22. Compare that to data from 2024, the average number of API endpoints was 42. So almost double. And you and I kind of joked about it that, yes, that's maybe like 2-3 resources more, which represents a couple of more endpoints, but still, this is a significant increase, especially with some of these more traditional companies that don't necessarily ship often and regularly. So I think people are recognizing the value of APIs and the kind of benefits that you get with being able to innovate faster, being able to ship, deploy, and kind of reuse all of these different components. And I think you're going to see that happen even more in the future. Now, go
I
ahead.
think it's interesting, like to some extent, these things are even compounding, right? On the one hand, you see a lot of these organizations having more and more APIs, and then the APIs become more and more complex, right? So you kind of have like two levels that are kind of even increasing than the overall size of the things that you have to manage.
I think all of these data points, and this is how we always try to look at this, even with our product Trouble and with the report, we try to look at things holistically, right? Why are some of these things happening, and how do they actually connect to all of the other things that we report on? And you're absolutely right. I think the complexity is growing, the amount of APIs is growing, and it all kind of based on the conversations that we have, based on the talking to hundreds of enterprise architects. Like, yes, they're all realizing, hey, we need to invest more in APIs. It allows us to be faster. It allows us to reuse a lot of code. It at the end of the day allows us to either get to money faster or save money by reusing a lot of these things, which is, I think, what everybody wants at this moment in time. The next two things have to do with the ever popular AI trend that's happening. So one, we've noticed a rapid expansion of AI-based APIs. Now, what's an AI-based API? So as part of the kind of product that we have, you can define a category for every API, and one of those is, of course, artificial intelligence. We also look at the data around, what your outgoing connections might be, if it's to a AI LLM, or what's the domain name. So as we know, everybody kind of uses .ai these days, so it's very easy to understand what the category is. But we've looked at the data we started tracking this in 2023 and 2022. So when I compared the jump from 22 to 23, it was a 97% jump, right? Which is great. But when we look at the data from 2023 to 2024, we saw a jump of 807%, which is now tremendously, tremendously higher, especially when you look at the other industries where the growth across all the other industries has been on average 10% in each of them. We are, I believe, truly living in an age where people are literally building APIs on a daily basis to try to either communicate with an AI, LLM assistant, whatever it is, or share data so that they can do that, especially with the advent of AI agents and everything that I think is going to be happening this year. So it somewhat makes sense. What kind of worries me here, particularly, is the maturity of those APIs, and we come back to the JavaScript based score, and we'll come up to security, but also the understanding of all of these APIs. I think that's not necessarily on par with the growth, even though people are trying to do that. So the last thing here is the bar for API security is extremely low. I will say it is getting better. Like we track, as I mentioned, three categories: performance, security, and design itself. And we've seen people focus a lot on performance when we compare the data to 2023. So performance is better, but a staggering stat, 52% of all requests had no form of authentication. And Another one would be 55% still do not use any SSL or TSL encryption. And the average security score was unfortunately 40 out of 100. It is the lowest category. It is the lowest score across three categories. So people have significantly better scores in performance. I would say actually more than 60 out of 100. Design as well. But security, I think, is still one afterthought. And again, coming back to my comment earlier, fundamentally, this is about understanding. If you want to increase security, you first need to have an understanding of what the situation is, and how do you go about it. So those are the five top findings, in my opinion, that you should know about. And definitely we dive deeper into any of these in the report itself.
If I had to summarize it, and then I'm curious what I would say, the really interesting bits from my point of view are you have to invest in scaling, right? That's only going to be so. So that I think is where, on the one hand, the landscapes are growing. On the other hand, I think AI is, like you said, right? AI is pushing a lot of these things. Agents will push them even more, I would assume.
I agree.
And and then the other thing would be that, okay, and also maybe have a close look at your APIs. There probably is, I like to call it potential, which is the nice way of saying it, right? So be a little bit more careful in terms of how you design APIs and how you secure them. That would be kind of my super high level takeaways from your report.
I think you're absolutely right. I think what is going to happen this year and probably in 2026 as well, as these AI agents and AI assistants become more and more a part of everyday life, especially in the enterprise world, you are going to see a need for APIs to be able to relay a lot of that internal data to these assistants or agents. You will also see, in my opinion, something that is going to keep happening, and we already see signs of this. Is you know a lot of these LLMs and agents nowadays scrape the web, which is great, right? You could do it. It's not as efficient, I would say, but also there's like data that isn't on the web. So you're going to see a lot more partnerships, like the partnerships that OpenAI did with Reddit, or that the Perplexity did with Crunchbase. All of this data is delivered through an API, right? And I think that anybody sitting on top of data that is relevant, you will have an API as a catalyst to start unlocking new revenue. if you want to do that, you need to get your APIs in order in terms of quality, security, and performance, because nobody wants to buy an API that's going to be super slow. Nobody wants to pay for an API that might leak private information or something like that. So you have to really take care of your API landscape, the understanding across them, and then you can go, in my opinion, you'll be able to make a lot more revenue this year and next year than you have previously with your APIs.
Yeah, I think that's totally true, and a little bit unrelated, I think, to your report. But just, I think today was in the paper that there's another court case with, in that case, Thomson Reuters,
Yeah,
kind of, I think, winning some case against like a misuse of their data, or at least that's what they said, right? And I think there will be more and more of these things. So,
yeah,
so there will, like you say, right? I think there will be more of a more controlled ecosystem of how
yeah.
these models are getting trained, and that's a good, like you say, it's a good thing for monetization, but it also means that you need to be able to actually deliver those things. Right?
Exactly. I think the same thing that happened to the web circa, I'm gonna say, 2010 tens and onwards, where everybody kind of started realizing, hey, we are actually making money on these websites, and these are like really meaningful businesses, but we need to understand performance. And you saw Google making a huge push with Chrome and like tooling around understanding the performance and everything, etc. So I think that's something that is, expected. I expect that to happen in the next couple of years, especially with AI agents becoming more and more important to everybody's daily life.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, Vedran, thank you so much for taking the time. And as we said, the report is available for free on, that was what, report.travel.com?
Exactly. You could download
Okay.
it completely for free on report.treble.com. Again, treble with
Okay.
two L's.
Yeah, travel with two L's. That's that's important to say. I think
Yeah.
people would not necessarily type it that way. Okay. Once again, thank you so much, Vedran, for being here.
Thank you so much, Eric, for having me. I'm looking forward to the next time.
Yeah. And thanks everybody for watching. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and until next time, keep getting APIs to work. Bye everybody.
Bye bye.